You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailie.
Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2024, and welcome to Freight Famous, a podcast produced by Rose Rocket. New episodes of Freight Famous will be released about twice a month. On this podcast, we talk with guests about how they build, scale, and automate their transportation and logistics businesses. If you have a trucking business, you might be looking for trucking software, or you might know someone who is. If you do, I've got good news. Rose Rocket has some free money to give you. That's right, free moolah. All through our incentivized referral program. To learn more, email us at referralpartners@roserocket.com, and a member of our team will be in touch. I'm your host, Justin Bailie, co-founder at Rose Rocket. What a great way to kick off the year. Today, I'm going to introduce our guest, Tim Dooner. You know Dooner from What the Truck. I'm not going to say anymore. You know who he is. There's nothing. I'll give you the intro. He's worked at a whole bunch of different places. Their podcast is by far the gold standard of our industry. It was a great honor to have him on the show today, and I think return the favor where he's interviewed 750 people on an annual basis, and sort of be able to turn it around and ask him some questions. Today, he got into what's ahead for 24 in the market. I mean, you got to appreciate he listens to so many people talking all the time. I think his point of view is really, really well versed. He talks about alcoholism, talks about rehab, talks about how he got started in this industry, talks about how to start a podcast. It was an excellent show. I loved every minute of it, and I hope you will too. Enjoy. Timothy Dooner, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. I got a sip of Diet Coke right here. Take a swig right now. Make sure the throat is supple for Freight Famous. I'm excited to be on here.
Okay, man, it's really great having you, and what a great way for us to kick off the new year with, the show's called Freight Famous, and I was looking at the roster over the last 2 years we've been doing this show. I could make a case that you're the most famous person in the freight world that we've had on the show, so great way to start 2024. You're making a face.
You had some bangers on here. You just had my buddy from Edison, Chase, on the show.
That's pretty cool stuff, eh?
Him on TikTok, him just in his parents' yard with this truck that he built, his 2 trucks that he's built. He'll get 600,000 views on TikTok. It's amazing, the persona that people have been able to create in freight. It wasn't like this, when I first started creating media in 2017, and people would laugh at me when I first started, and they're like, "This is stupid." Freight media's press releases, Dooner.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I want to talk about a million things, and I do want to talk about Chase actually real quick. I'm super glad you brought that up too, because on that note, I don't know if we had him obviously on the show. It's man, they raised $1 million or $1.5 million or something in a couple weeks just through posting "Hey, we're crowdsourcing," and people just piled in, and I think he said his biggest investor was $5,000, just from what he's doing and from the social media, and so it's beyond even just the I'm doing a thing, come watch me. These are businesses and brands that are being created here.
No, they're it's a true story. Just today, maybe about an hour and a half before I came on with you, a venture capital company, which happens quite more than people think. People reach out to me after the show, after I have certain guests and companies on. They go, "Hey, what's your read? What's your feel on the company? What's the true story there?" And they reached out about Chase and Edison. I told them my thoughts on it and where I thought their market fit was and where they were at. And it's so cool. It's so cool because we've created we've created sort of all on our own this freight ecosystem. And I think it's because it's a small world and it's become so connected. But even a call like that is so fulfilling because it shows that it works and it's touching all corners of where we want our messages to be broadcast to. And that's from the driver in the seat all the way up to the guy who's making investments and writing the checks for all of this to happen. It's all interconnected. And we see that more than ever this year where the supply chain has struggled, and all of those struggles hurt all of us. We're interconnected.
Yeah. That's a great call. And what a difficult task, I think, but as I think you're alluding to, a very rewarding one to be able to tie back really frontline sort of blue collar operation all the way kind of to executive suites and all the different people in between. What a daunting task. But again, I think one honestly, man, that you've done really, really well from kind of the sort of the shock jock style kind of presentation stuff, but like, you know, in sitting down with you in the limited time we've gotten to know each other, just like you're quite articulate, and you know, you kind of look at your history of working stuff. You've had a broad scope of work experiences, and so I think you actually have done an amazing job for our industry. So I kind of want to thank you in that way, that I think you and yourself have actually done an amazing job running from both end to end on this, and kind of commanding the attention of the executives all the way down to the driver. And I think you're well respected in all those degrees. So, you know, well done, and thank you.
Thanks. I mean, it's funny. I like at F3, our event where I did interview you. We were like, the tables were turned, but I did a session there with Craig Fuller about building freight media brands and what goes in it. And one thing Craig said up there, he's like, you are the first person I've met who can have genuine conversations with a truck driver, a venture capitalist. You can go hang out with the founders of these companies who are multimillionaires, and you can swim in those pools. And one of the reasons, like I before I even started podcasting, like I had to do improv. Like I did improv in Boston the first time I ever went to rehab for alcoholism, because one of the reasons I told my therapist I was drinking was the social anxiety. Like you'd be at all these conferences and I'd find it tough to engage with people. So I started doing improv, and it like really taught you to think on your feet. And it really started this sort of road and this journey. But one thing I always like sort of had in mind was like I've been in this business since 2005, and I'd read the news sites and I'd read the press releases, and everything seemed like so anonymous and so company logo. And I would read these stories and I'm like, someone needs to bring this to life. Like we need to know who these things are, these people are, and these stories are, and meet the drivers who are impacted by yellow, as well as like the union reps and the shipper whose freight is going to be stuck on the dock. Cause all of that tells the story. And I always thought that was sort of lacking in our media, was just sort of filling this out and really personifying a world that ultimately is about moving commodities.
You know, you hit a bunch of, you tapped a bunch of reserves there, and I want to kind of follow a few of those down. So let's go back. How did you get here? When I asked, and I know that's a kind of, that's a pretty open-ended question. So maybe going back to, like you said, you started in 2005. Where are you from? How did you get into the space in 2005? And what was the path from 2005 to here?
You know, it was an accident. I was living out in Southern California. I went out there for college to Cal Arts, and I worked in the music industry. I went to school for music technology. This was the early 2000s, and Napster, LimeWire, all that stuff was really big. So it was a really bad time to enter the industry, because if you look at a chart of like CD sales from like 2000, it's just a straight line down. It was horrible. It was like a bloodbath, and couldn't make any money. It was very hard to excel. I was at an indie label, and it was fun. It was rewarding work. I got to meet a lot of bands. Actually, if you are familiar with the band Five Finger Death Punch, the guy Zoltan Bathory from there, before he was in that band, he was one of the people I signed over there, and it was fun. But it came to a point where like, I was going to be like 25. I had to make real money. I had to start thinking about the future, and I miss Boston. Even though my parents had followed me out to SoCal, I miss Boston. And one day a buddy just randomly in the middle of the night, he DM'd and he said, "Hey, I got a room open for $500 in Boston." So I went out there, and then after like 3 months, couldn't find a job. I thought I was a shoo-in with my music experience to be able to work for, like, if you remember, Rock Band was really big in like 2005, and Harmonix was in Cambridge. They were the company that made Rock Band. And I'm like, dude, I know music licensing. I know how to get tracks. I will be in that. That didn't work. And after 3 months, I called my dad. I'm like, "Hey, well, it's getting a little tight." And he goes, "Okay. Well, hey, I know a guy over at FedEx Trade Networks. I know you probably don't give a crap about like Ford or even know what it is." And I was like, "I don't, but I got to do something." So I went down, I went for the interview, and like a lot of people, it's like a roach motel. I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought I would just get through the winter, right? Appease my dad, continue my job search, and I would be like out of this business within like 6 months. That didn't happen. Instead, like I got into it. I started to get more comfortable. I started to learn stuff. My only initial concern at FedEx was like, I was the youngest person there by like 10 years.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people there that were like doing entries, and it immediately, like the first bell that went off in my head was, I got to learn as much as I can in this house as quick as I can. So like 10, 15 years from now, and there's nothing wrong with being like an entry coordinator, but you have to understand a lot of these people's jobs, like that were doing that position, they were like, their kids had gone off to school. They'd come back into like the workforce, stuff like that. And it was like, a $30,000 job, and I'm in Boston. I'm like, this isn't sustainable, but it's a start. And FedEx Trade Networks, they had such an amazing training program, and it was great. And my first account was Reebok, and I got to learn all about air imports and how to classify shipments and how to dispatch and how to bill. And after a little while, I got bored with that, and I switched over to duty drawback. And unfortunately, the thing with FedEx, after like 5 years, it was like we were a satellite office. So unless you go to Memphis, right, corporate, you're really not going to climb any higher. And I was like, so this is a perfect opportunity to learn more about the industry. I got to work at Talbot's to do a CTPAT revalidation and learn about that side of compliance. I then switched over to sales, and I got to learn how selling truckloads and how selling ocean freight works. And then eventually I got fired from sales. I switched over to marketing for this company, Aborn & Company. I had started a podcast called The Shipping Pod. And they heard it, and they were like, first I was ghostwriting for them. And then they're like, all right, bring on a podcast. I started a podcast called Consulting Logistics.
I'm sorry, what year is this?
This was so I started the podcast in January of 2017. I'd just gotten out of rehab. I had no job. We just had our second kid. I knew that like I had PTSD from freight sales, from getting fired a couple times. And I wanted to get in marketing, but nobody would hire me. So I was like, all right, I'll start a podcast. And maybe if I can get some traction, that would be like my living resume. And I could also, it's like a Trojan horse. I could meet people and start relationships. And that worked. This guy, Steve Aborn at Freight Plus, he heard the show and he was like, yeah, come on, bring your show to us, and you'll be our director of marketing. And it was cool. And I liked it, except for like my passion was the podcasting side, not really like making like RFP, like working on RFPs and making pitch decks and that kind of thing. Although it turned out to be really valuable for what I do now, because I got to learn a lot of insight from a 4PL side in trucking. But I saw Craig Fuller in 2019. I saw that he was going on this Freight Future Roadshow. This was February 2019. And I was like, he probably wants some shine on this. We weren't like that big of a show, but maybe he wants some shine. So I reached out. I was like, Craig, you want to come on the show? And I interview him. And I remember the day I interviewed him. This is never give up, people. Like what happened was he was supposed to be on like a computer, right? Super easy. He connects, I connect. We're on our VoIP. Turns out Craig at the time didn't really use computers as much. So he wanted to be on the phone. Here's the problem. I had no way of connecting in a phone. So I'm like, oh man, I got to cancel. And then something in my head went off like 30 seconds later. And I'm like, no, get back in touch with him, fix this immediately. So what I did instead is I set up my recorder and I recorded my own voice, and then I used 1-800 conference call, and I called him on that, and I had his audio from that. The merger didn't work, so I had to take his track, and then I had to re-record every line I said over it. I don't think he even knows this to this day. I re-recorded all my lines over it. He take a listen. He loved it. And then like a couple days later, he DMs me on LinkedIn and says, if you ever want a job in Chattanooga, I didn't know where Chattanooga was. I'm a masshole from Boston. I'm like, it could be Timbuktu to me. And, but I knew like they had the amplifier, and he told me they were building Freightwaves TV and they wanted to make podcasting a core concept of it. I wasn't 100% sure what I'd be doing when I got to Freightwaves other than like getting to podcast. But I convinced my wife, and we came down here, and we haven't looked back since. And that was April of 2019.
I've got to ask, and I know it's completely divergent from all the freight talk that we're talking about, but you've hit it twice, and the listeners will kill me if I don't double click on this. You got to talk to me about rehab. You got to talk to me a little bit about that journey and that process. And I think obviously there's something in there because you said it twice. So take me through that. You talked about the social anxiety. We talk a lot about issues on this show, both from a personal side. I've been interviewed. I've shared mine. So I think it's almost become thematic to what we do here. So I think as we're digging in, let's just tell me about that.
I've had a lifelong problem with alcohol. Like when I was 15, my parents were away, and I was staying at my buddy's house, and we drank so much. I collapsed on the train tracks, and I ended up in the hospital after throwing up on the street. The cops came. It was a big scene. I got like grounded for forever, and it sucked. And then I decided not to drink again. And I didn't. I was like super good about it. Then I got to college, and a week there, I'm at like the grocery store with the girl, and she's like, "You look a little older than me. You think you could get like this bottle of wine?" We're in Bennington, Vermont. And I was like, well, I mean, I'm only 18, but let's see if they'll sell it to us. So like they did. And then I kind of liked the girl, and she wanted, and I was like, all right. And then like I started drinking, and I got that taste on my lips. And then I was running hard. Like I started drinking very hard after that for years, up until 2009. I remember I was going into like FedEx and it was getting like, I was like smelling, like you don't think, you're like, a vodka doesn't smell. You don't think you smell. I like reeked. And like, I think my manager knew. She was like, hey, I used to be your age too, but like, take it easy. But it got to the point where like, it was getting harder and harder to wake up and harder to perform. And it wasn't making me happy. And it was making me really depressed. So I decided to go to rehab. Unfortunately, at the time, I was like, if I can prove that I can go 90 days, then like, I don't have a problem. So I did that. And then another girl comes in the picture.
And how old are you at this point?
I was 28.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Okay.
And then I was dating this girl at the time, and she goes, "Oh, you did your 90 days." So to celebrate, she got me a bottle of Jack Daniels. I wish she hadn't done that, but like, I'm not going to blame her. I mean, it's still on me.
Yeah.
And I started slow, and then it just built back up, and it built back up. And then it got even worse when I got into freight sales, because you had a lot of time at home to work on things. There were plenty of days you could wake up and you could hair of the dog it. You could pour some vodka in that coffee and have the Irish whiskey. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And then when I got fired from in 2016 from this company, I remember they gave me a live paycheck. And my first thought in the car was like, awesome, I can go buy a handle of Tito's and obliterate myself. And I did exactly that. I got that one. A couple of days later, I bought another bottle of it. And then I'm just sitting there, and like, these hangovers are starting to become near-death experiences. And I'm like, this will kill me. This will kill me if I'm unemployed. I just had this kid, and I'm like drowning myself. Like, what am I doing? Like, you got to take control of this. So that's when I was drunk, and in the middle of the night, one of my old bosses, when I worked back at the record label, he had come out to me about his journey with alcoholism and him going to rehab and how he got sober. And that really, really empowered me, especially like in that night, just remembering that. So I called him up. He was in California. It was like 3 a.m. my time. And I'm like, Brian, I got to do something about this, man. I gotta take control. I got this kid. I got this wife here. I'm going to lose everything. Where, I don't have a job. We're probably going to go bankrupt in the next year. And he's like, look, the first thing you've got to do is take control of the situation, go see somebody. And he emboldened me. So after I got off with him, I sent an email to my wife and my parents. And I said, look, if I don't go to rehab tomorrow morning, force me to. I know I'm drunk right now, but I got to go. I have to. And I couldn't go that day because you still have to call like health insurance and stuff. But they were able to get me into this place called McLean, which is the same place from Girl Interrupted. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It's a late 90s film, but it's a dual diagnosis facility. It's for depression, anxiety, and alcoholism. And that's what I went in there.
Which tend to run hand in hand in many ways, right? I mean, these are linked in so often, right?
They definitely are. And it, like, rehab's a trip because you go in there and it's not just alcoholics. You like, especially this was like 2016. So a big issue, especially in Boston at the time, was pills, like pill pop and opiates. Yeah. So you would get people like intaked, and those dudes, they were like the heroin addicts. They would be screaming bloody murder that whole night. And then for the next 5 days they were in rehab, they barely moved these guys. Like, it was tough. And that like, if you ever don't want to get into those drugs, go to rehab once. That'll scare the S out of you. But I went there, I had a great therapist. And when I was in there with them, we went over my issues again. And that's where, I addressed social anxiety and all that stuff. And I'd mentioned that one of the things I wanted to start when I was in sales was a podcast for the previous company I was with. I couldn't get every door when I was trying to do sales calls, but I was like, hey, if I have a podcast so I can give value back, maybe I can interview these people, create a relationship with them, and then go get their freight. So I was like, this could be a Trojan horse. They were like, no, nobody listens to freight podcasts. We don't think it'll do anything. Plus our marketing guy does one. And I'm like, yeah, nobody listens to it because the one he does sucks and the audio is bad and there's nothing good about it. Although I didn't say all of that, but in my head, I'm like, yeah, but I think I can do it better. But I hadn't proved anything. Nobody had any faith in me, but I told the therapist that, and he goes, well, what the hell else are you going to do? Do that show. So I called up a buddy of mine who I'd mentioned it to before, this guy, Ryan. He was my original co-host. And we started this show called The Shipping Pod. And after 10 episodes, he ditched me. He was like, all right, I don't think this is really going anywhere. And, early stage of a podcast, it doesn't seem, although at the time the field was kind of open. So you could get 500 to 1,500 audio downloads on a freight podcast, which is pretty good for 2017-ish. And that's where Steve took notice, because I was in Boston. Freight Plus, which was called Aborn and Company at the time, was right down the street. He actually knew my former co-host Ryan, so that was one of the reasons he first listened. And he was like, This is good. I think that we can market through this and we can attract talent. Like he got it. He was like, we can attract talent into our company. We want to grow this organization. And if we present ourselves to a younger audience by having podcasting and being a little bit hipper, then hopefully that would attract some people, as well as, bring some brand awareness and all that kind of stuff. So he got it. And he was such a big supporter. Like I owe so much to Steve just for giving me that opportunity. In 2017, being an independent podcaster with my wife having to basically support the whole thing. I made $11,000 in 2017, and that none of it was from podcasting. All of it was from ghostwriting, but at least I was getting some of the marketing work. And I think like my wife and my dad was a big supporter. My dad was like, I think you're on to something here. Like, I think that personifying people in a very sort of nameless and anonymous industry has an angle to it. I think people in this business, they have egos like anybody else. And so many of us never had an opportunity to get featured, right? Nobody had a chance to tell their story. So that was always like the initial goal.
That's amazing. And I think I want to, because I think again, I think people, they look up to you in this space. And again, we are kicking this show off as the first of the year for ours. So with people who are maybe coming across after the holidays and thinking, I've got to make some changes this year, and I've got to get, and drinking's, I think, a massive. You probably think about the various New Year's resolutions that kind of come around and around. I have to imagine, diet is a big one, obviously, and I want to lose some weight, but like, God, a close second or maybe even a first there has to be like, I want to get drinking under control. And we're in a movement now where it feels like drinking is becoming, it's almost an old technology. It feels like to me when I think of it, as it just feels like it's kind of on the way out. And I think society is set up in a way that is so much more accepting free. When you were trying to quit alcohol, even in those various, in that era of 2000, it was socially almost impossible to do it. Right. And I still think it's extremely challenging, but I think there's a sliver of light there where there's a lot of non-drinking. There's a lot like these things are starting to grow. And so I think it's a better time than any to do it. But what type of advice would you give to people? And maybe they don't have to be full alcoholics in a sense, but I think for me, like I've had a problem where I really, if I keep alcohol in the house, I'm just going to drink it all. And so I just don't anymore. And basically it's left me to not drink because I really don't go anywhere all that often. I do here and there, but for the most part. And I think there's a term for this, but what kind of advice would you offer to people, or what do you think is the right way for them to start, taking this on, maybe of reducing or eliminating their alcohol consumption, or just making changes in life that are just, more balanced or more in line with what they want to be doing and who they want to be?
If you're, I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. Especially that first year was really tough, because if you're self-medicating, you have to figure out another method, right? If you take away that crutch, if you take away how you're getting through the day, you now have to sit with all of those things in the dead of sober, in the dead of night. You can't drink yourself to sleep anymore. You have to deal with everything. You have to figure out an entire new set of tools. And I'm not going to lie, you might lose some friends, right? Like a lot of you, if you drink a lot of your buddies tend to drink a lot too. Yeah. And when you hang out, like, it's like, let's watch the game and get sloshed. Like, let's go like, if you are a heavy drinker, you tend to run with heavy drinkers. And unfortunately, like, you can't really do that as much, especially in the beginning. You have to take the reins. But for me, what was really helpful was naming it, right? Like naming that it's actually a problem. I messed up when I only did 90 days. Like when I named it, and I'm like, this is a lifelong problem. I'm an alcoholic. It doesn't matter if I don't drink, I'm still an alcoholic. And if you understand that and you're binary with it and you go, okay, I'm turning that 1 to 0, and it's got to remain there. And it has to always stay there, because it's very hard to turn that 1 back. And you have to accept that. You have to accept that. You have to work on the tools. I think therapy, especially at first, can be very helpful. I had a problem with, like, my one problem with therapy though was like, I didn't really trust therapists. Like, especially at first, like I just wasn't even honest with them. Like we'd go and sit there and I'd be like, who is this guy? Like, I'm just going to say whatever to get out of this room. And that wasn't necessarily helpful, but I found like the real therapy being like talking to family, talking to my wife, seeing my kids, and also just seeing that this can happen. Like after you get through those first few weeks of like not drinking, you like anything, you start losing the habit. Like the idea when you're running hard and you have a really bad habit of not doing it that next day or 2 days, it seems like a long time.
Yeah.
But when you stop doing that, it stops becoming the habit, you replace it with other things. It doesn't even matter. Like for me at first, it was like, I'll just play video games. Like instead of buying a handle, I'll buy a video game and I'll play that. And like, so like, I understand it's like transference of an addiction to something else, but like find that more positive conduit. But you ultimately have to want it. Like, I don't think people can force you into rehab. And that's where you see like the sort of like recidivism or people relapsing because they're forced in there. And I saw this in rehab all the time. Like there would be people there who were there like 9 times. And it's like a lot of the guys who are on opiates. And the reason why is like their parole officer sent them there, or like their halfway home sent them there, or they got busted by like the cops again. And they're not there like in earnest. If you're there and you really want it, then I think that it can happen for you. But ultimately, it comes down to you controlling it and finding that support system. I think it's the most valuable thing that I've ever done. It's one of the reasons I think I've been so passionate about podcasting, because that's one of the things I fell into, and I poured that sort of that passion and that idea into. And it's like, okay, this is my Sebastian, my second kid, and this podcast are like my sober babies, and this is a mission. This is what's going to pull us out of the dirt. And so far it has. It's worked really well, and we've been really successful. We got ourselves out of some really, really bad situations, and we rebuilt, and we're doing really well now. And it's fulfilling.
I want to just click on the one thing because I think it's a really interesting. It's an excellent call out, but I'm not sure it's super clear. So I want to understand this. I want to just understand what it means to name something. So when you say to name it, what is that? How does that manifest? What does that look like?
It's taking ownership, right? Like there's like a lot of people get defensive, or they could get defensive. And I know I did at first. So you get defensive about the term alcoholism, because if you accept it, it is a lifelong thing. And that isn't easy for people to do. That's not easy to go, okay, I have this disease. Like there's no medicine for it. I mean, there's some, like there's those pills people take that like they'll get sick if they get drunk, but I'm not sure someone can get really sober using that kind of stuff. Yeah. You have to want it. You have to not pick the glass up. Ultimately, it comes down to your hand in your mouth. So you have to admit to yourself what the problem is. And this is true with anything, right? Like any issue you have, if you don't admit you have a problem, then you're going to find any excuse that that's not a problem. And then you lash out. And what it creates is a very toxic environment too, because if you don't admit you're an alcoholic and someone accuses you of it, oh boy, right? Yeah. Like that's a battle now. Oh, you just got accused of something. Once you accept it, it's fine. And one of the reasons I have, and I've been open about it, I did a TED Talk, and I'm cool with talking about podcasts on it, is it all goes back to that first boss I had. He admitted that he had a problem. He told me and empowered him. And it'd be very unfair to me to just like shelter and keep this inside, especially like with the platform I have. And I know in this industry, people drink very, very heavily. And you made a good point earlier. You said that there's sort of been a sea change in the way people treat alcohol. And I can tell that too. When I went to events 10 years ago, if you weren't drinking, someone would put a drink in your hand. And if you're like, no, I'm not doing it, they would very, very much pressure you. Now, like I'm at F3, I've got non-alcoholic beer in my hand, or like some soda water. No one says that. Everyone respects it. Everyone is super, super cool with it. And you kind of find like your sober tribe at the event.
Yeah, I can't actually believe. So I'm as I mentioned, I would say more or less sober. And I know that's not probably a weird thing to say, but from where I was to where I am, I seem to have found a throttle point where I can have a drink once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. But to your point, it can really creep up still. And actually, it's kind of 2 things I want to say to that. So one, I actually can't believe how many people are sober. Is one thing. So as I got out of that, where every event, because before it was, I would drink every day. Like, maybe not chronically smashing hard bar, but I couldn't say no to a beer, period. Like I love beer. I still do, but I just can't be around it because it's too much for me to resist. But I think if it was an event, I was drinking beer, period. And lots of it probably. But now that I don't do that, I'm actually shocked at how many people don't drink. And you don't have to say, man, I used to always be so almost inspired. And like jealous is a wrong word, because I actually felt like a sense of like, I looked up to these people, but there would always be in my mind this dude, it was a dude to me. And it was almost like a mythical creature that would be this guy. He was always sober, but he was like, he was handsome. He was in good shape. He was like, he would leave early, and his like eyes were clear and his head was high, and all the girls thought he was amazing. Like he just commanded sort of respect, and he didn't need alcohol. And I always felt like I always wanted to be that guy. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if that was actually a real person or just some like visual, and it's like, as I've, mine is probably like the handsome and the well-dressed and all that aspect, as I've become that guy, essentially in my own mind. it does feel really good. I'm surprised. I used to think it was like the one person, but there's actually a lot more. And I guess in some ways I'm saying this just, to you to have a conversation with, but I'm saying this to the listeners all to be like, it is actually, it's not as lonely over here on the other side as you might think. And I think your use of sort of video games, what you said, I think there's a really important skill there, because the one thing I noticed as I eliminated this from my life was what I would call, and I think others would have different words for, but it felt like boredom. I felt this incredible boredom not having alcohol. Alcohol was this perfect sort of like 5:05, I start drinking, and that became exciting because of, I mean, it wasn't, it's a depressant and it does all the things, but in my mind, in the absence of that, it was like, I'm bored. And honestly, I was bored for months and months and months and months. Like, it wasn't like a couple weeks later, I'm like, cool, I found something else. I would say sometimes still to this day, I struggle with what I would kind of think is boredom that I feel like alcohol will cure. But I think having other things to do and to lean into, and man, do you ever find there's a lot more time in the day, eh? Like, there's just so much more capacity to do things when you're not drunk for half of it.
Yeah. I would like 10 years ago, people didn't talk as much about dopamine, and I didn't realize that. And I've always suffered from depression. And what I realized over time was that like alcoholism was giving me that dopamine, but also robbing me of it. And like, I would spend entire days at work, like hungover, living to get home and just drink again, and like not be in this sort of like this cycle rut. And it really, career-wise, it really set me back for a while too, because you start to become comfortable. In your hangover and in your addiction, and it takes over your mind, and it's like, let's not rock the boat. This supports it. You're getting by okay, but at the same time, like, you're wasting time. You're wasting years where you could be growing even more, and you could be moving further, and you could just be doing better. And not to mention, like, at a certain point, like, if you're just getting sloshed at conferences, you're going to say something stupid at some point. You're going to hurt your career. You're going to limit it, and you're also like, if you're in sales or something, you're going to make the next day really crappy. And what happens when the next day is really crappy is like, you become more standoffish. It becomes much more hard to approach people. And like, now when I see these people at the conference now, I'm like, the boys stayed out late. They're dragging ass. I'm like, I'm fresh as a daisy. Now I'm like in bed at like 10 o'clock at those events.
Oh, buddy, I don't even make it to 10. So yeah, I hear you. And it's like, and I'm, oh, you're hitting on some stuff for me. I've said some stupid shit, and I've got these like these moments that I can grab onto, and still that someday I'll be laying in bed and I think about this thing I said at a conference to this person. I've got kind of probably a small handful of them, and it's like my stomach just turns. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I did that. I acted that way. And yeah, I've got a few of those moments, and it's the consequences. But I'm hopefully a better man for it today. And I really appreciate you sharing that, man. That's real life stuff, and thank you for that. I do want to talk about What the Truck. I do want to. I have a thing here, a note that I just kind of scan, I look at the notes, but I want to just talk to you about whatever and not get too hung up on the script here. But do you do 1,500 guests a year?
Let's see. Well, there's 4 to 6 guests an episode. There's 3 episodes a week. Sans like the 2 weeks I take off. So What is that? 50 times 3 is 150. What is 150 times 5?
So, 750.
750. Okay.
Yeah. That's okay. So still, that is a crazy. Talk to me about it. And I think people would be interested in this. And I think because there is a, there's an aspiring, desire to do podcasts, and they don't have to be all What the Truck in scope. Obviously, that's a legitimate professional production you guys are putting on. And I know, like, we do a guest every 2 weeks, and there's 2 other people sitting in this room with me right now. Like, that is a job, getting guests, all the audio, video, all the stuff that you know about, and all the things in between, cancellations and all the stuff. I think let's talk about like what the scope of that is, and then maybe we'll kind of go down to how does somebody get started in this, and what would we give some tips as a right way to get off the ground. And I think you made a point before. I just want to make sure we hit it here. It's like anything that's marketing driven, in my opinion, it's a long tail, and you can't give up too soon. Like, you're not going to see the results for a minimum of 6 months. So you might as well just do it for those 6 months. Because if you do it for 3 months, you quit, and like 6 months later, like, oh shit, that's kind of getting some traction. Like, you could have been doing it all along. Just stay with it. But I want to touch on that. But anyway, let's talk about what does the orchestration look like for What the Truck today? What does it take to do a show like that?
Yeah. So I to this day, I still book all of the guests, except like when we have sponsors and stuff like that. Like that, I have a team that handles the business side of that. I kind of like having a firewall because I have a relationship with a lot of the guests, so I don't want to like have to also take it off air and be pitchy. Like my job is like more of an ambassador, relationship bringer and stuff, and I've gotten really good at that. And the reason why is the concept of what podcasting for me has always been a networking device. So it's always been very important for me to control the booking. So I can reach out to guests, I can form those relationships, and I can like leverage the show in that way. And then when it became time to do a show like What the Truck, it was completely different when I got to Freightwaves. It was started by Chad Prevost and John Paul Hampstead. And when they were doing it for the first 64 episodes before I got there, which also a lot of episodes can be made. I'm on episode 665 will be tomorrow. So this is a very, 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 very long road. And my one advice too to newer podcasters is like, guys, I do this professionally. I have a team. Like this is how I make my living. This is my career. I wouldn't necessarily compare what like you can do. And you can do great things on a smaller level without like trying to run as fast as we are, because I have helped to run this fast. I wouldn't run this fast if I didn't. But how it starts is like in Notepad on my phone. Like first I find stories and the assets that I want to use. And with the guests I'm very social media oriented. So I'm always looking for someone posting an interesting story about like what they've done or what their company's done or a new product or something. And
Sorry,
if you notice
can we pause on that for a quick sec? Because I want to actually make sure this is important. So are you given like on a because I think I want to take like the big business of this and kind of like and use some of what you do there that can be applied downstream, at least from like a philosophical perspective. So are you saying that like there must be a template or a parameter on the themes that you're trying to work within? Like, how do you know where to look? I think it's actually really difficult for people starting a podcast. It's like, okay, like, how do you know 750 people? Like, what is the guiding principle that allows you to look in the right places to find the people?
Well, you meet 750 people by starting with one, right?
Yeah.
So basically, like I'll be on LinkedIn or X, and how I always want the show to have like a little bit of a balanced take. So if I can, I want a driver on, I want a founder on, I want a boots on the ground worker on, and maybe someone who a new company or a new product. So there's different pillars, right? Not each interview is the same. Like one might be someone's journey. Like I just had this guy Nick on. It was his journey of alcoholism. We both talked about that. But surrounding that was like Donnie from Freightwaves breaking down sonar data and charts in the market. And then there's another person on who has a startup and they're talking about that. And the next guy who comes on, he bought this container lift device and he's demoing it for us and showing us how it works. And in between that, we're roping in news stories and viral clips. And these are all things I look for. And I don't like, because I make so many episodes, there's never a time when I'm like, this episode has to be about this and this one has to be about that. It's more they come together because it's a variety show as I'm booking the guests. And I know that like I need to have, like I always want to be 2 weeks out so I don't get too much anxiety. I always leave a couple open spots during a week for the really newsy stories. If I have to bring on like a Freightwaves journalist or someone from a company involved in the news story, and we got to bring more clarity to that. But otherwise, like I am just constantly every single day every single day I see something on there. I either send an invite like immediately to a person, I'll DM them, or I have a notepad like for each show, and I'll take like a link to their profile or take a screenshot, and then I'll reach out to them the next morning when I'm in front of the computer. I have very bad ADD, so I just have to have reminders. I have to use a lot of like tools like that so I can check my notepad. I will completely forget if it's not there. Something's not on my calendar. I will not remember. But then you just start reaching out. And I found in this space, especially because I started early, nobody like was getting featured on podcasts. So it was such an easy ask because I'm not asking you for money. I just want your time. Come on the show and talk. And it wasn't that hard when I started, and it's become incredibly easy now that the show is like well known. Most people, like it's sort of like Elon Musk, say yes when I ask them to come on. And at worst, they'll be like, "Yeah, I can't come on, with 1 hour's notice, Dooner, but like I can come on in like 2 weeks." And then it's like perfect book. The other thing I refrain from doing is like pre-show interviews. And the reason why is two. One, I have to book so many guests, so it's just not sustainable to have like a 30-minute conversation with everybody before a show, and I'm going to talk to you for like 10 or 15 minutes. Like that's just too much time in the back. I could be using that 30 minutes to book other guests. Mm-hmm. If we hit it off on the show, let's definitely talk afterwards. But like, we don't need, and what I also found too, is it kills a lot of curiosity. I've had like these great conversations, these great off-air conversations with people. Then you bring that same person on air and they're like super stiff.
Yeah.
And I kind of forget, like the one thing I do forget, I've gotten so used to this. Like I used to have the social anxiety. I've gotten so used to it now. I don't feel much of anything before a show anymore. It's just like, okay, this is my job. Here comes the camera. All I'm thinking about is like, okay, I hope production has this, and I hope that this time goes off, and I hope the guest shows up at this time. But I'm never like thinking about my performance anymore or what I'm going to say next. That like, you know, whatever part of your brain handles that, the subconscious, has like fully taken over. And that happens. I think that happens to most people after a few reps. But I always have to remind myself that a lot of these guests, What the Truck's their first podcast they've ever been on. And that's an honor too, but it's like the first time they've even had a camera and a mic, and like they're not used to like seeing themselves in like the screen looking back at them that they're talking to. And you can actually kind of see them looking at themselves like, how do I look right now? And then like, then it's your job as a host. So you have to try to comfort them, right? You have to try and get what you can out of them and make the most out of it you can. And I'm sure you've noticed, like, my opinion is, like, there will be some companies, their philosophy is, we want to come on and we want to get these bullet points out about the company and we want to talk about this. And I'm like, you're doing it wrong. This is 10 minutes. All you want people to leave with this is that they remember the name of the guest, they remember the name of the company, and they remember one thing that you do. And they want to reach out to you. They like what they heard. They trust you. They don't, like, this is a podcast. This is a fast-moving TV show. They don't need like a bunch of bullet points on like this. I don't expect people to have a pen and paper. They could be walking their dog for all I know. They could be at the grocery store. Podcasting is very intimate. It's on, you know, it's in people's eardrums. They're taking, and they're kind of passively listening too a lot of times.
That's it.
So you have to hit them with stuff. You have to sort of wake people up and be interesting, and I think interesting sells better too. So that's what I try to tell some of these companies. Some are still very old fashioned in how they think, and they want to be very controlling. And I'm like, that's great. Go to another show.
Right. Do you still listen to your own shows?
Every single one.
Get out. Do you really?
Yeah. And I critique my performance, and I take notes, and I also, because I have to clip too, and I work with Justin, who's our social media guy. And because I think of like What the Truck's a lot of things, but it's a flywheel. Like, it's a podcast, sure, but we can get like much better numbers if we think of the entire thing in aggregate. We think of it as the Freight Waves article, to the newsletter, to the audio podcast, to the video podcast, and most importantly nowadays, the clips and the TikTok channel and the Twitter channel, and what we're doing on LinkedIn, and creating all those awareness. Because like, if I go into our YouTube, our top show of the year isn't even a show. It's a clip that did 500,000 views as a YouTube short. Like, that is the #1 show. That's what that clip is. But these days too, like, people have short memories. I don't expect people to come in and listen to like 3 1-hour episodes a week. I expect them to tune into what they care about. And hopefully for the guests, that gives them more value, because as we know in podcasting, like, numbers are great, but what's even more great is who's listening.
Yeah.
Are these people who are decision makers? Are these people who can reach out to you and change your life by making a deal with you? Because that's what I want for my guests, is to have that kind of audience that can actually help them and reach out. And it always feels so good when a guest does reach out. They're like, dude, I came on and like 20 people reached out afterwards and they said a great job on the show. And now we got this partnership and I got this deal with this company. And it's like, hell yeah. Like, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be a positive force in this world that can help and can highlight people and that can shine a light on issues that are both good and bad. And when I look at modern media, I could probably get much better numbers if I sold out to ideologies. Like, if I went very far right, I could probably get much better numbers in this space. If I was very hard on like Biden or something like that. But like, our philosophy at Freight Waves is like, especially me, I can be opinionated, but I also don't want to alienate people for no reason. Yeah. And I talk to so many people, and what it's taught me is that like, the more I talk to people, the less I know, and the less I know about like their perspective. And over time, that sort of sharpens like those sort of hard edge hot takes. So in order for me to do a lot, I would have to like force them. Unless I'm really angry about something, I'm kind of like, I want to hear, and I think my audience wants to hear like their side of it. Like, when Yellow was going down, we had a union driver on and we had a non-union driver, and we let them talk, and we let both sides hear it out. And I think that's so much more important than like me doing like the cable news kind of thing, where it's like, I'm going to do a 10-minute diatribe on how you're supposed to feel about each one of these things, and then I'm going to browbeat these guests into my opinion if they don't agree with me. Like, that's just not my style.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you know, it's interesting as a Canadian, you know, we work in the American market pretty much I don't want to say exclusively, we have a large Canadian customer base, but as a percentage of business, percentage of population, we just have a lot more interactions in the US. And I've always found I'm fortunate in a sense. I think that my opinion of what's going on from a US perspective, if we're going to talk like politics or whatever it might be, is just, it's watered down and not really one way or the other, because it doesn't affect me in the same way. So I think I've been fortunate, because I can be very opinionated on things, and I have to be careful that I don't end up like going down a route. And sometimes it's just, I get sucked in like everybody else to recency bias and confirmation biases. And, social media is also wrecking my brain as well. So, it's a fine line. And it's interesting. You just kind of called it out. Like, going hard right in this industry is, it's kind of a layup, right? Like, if you want to grab that, that's where you play, and you could do that. So good on you for, I think, recognizing that and not falling into that. Cause I think it would be very easy to almost end up there and not realize it. All of a sudden you're like, shit, like I've gone pretty far here, in this regard. Cause it's kind of like 1 foot in front of the other. And you kind of get pulled that direction. Cause I imagine for you, and maybe I'll pose this as a question, would there not be a lot of, do you ever get asked to do anything like that? Or do you ever get, is there I don't know what I'm asking here. It's like
drawn into it.
Yeah, exactly. But with maybe a little bit more strategy or force or conversation, are there ever times where you're being asked to maybe go somewhere you're not comfortable or you don't think you should?
I try to use my instincts on that one. So if we have like a FreightWave story, it's been vetted by our editors, it makes sense. Like, there was just like a speed limiter one, Republicans push back about speed limiters. I happen to agree with them on that one too. I think that them setting the speed limit at 60 miles per hour is crazy for a truck. I mean, the original number was supposed to be 68, and this this lady at the FMCSA, she was called out for going to a meeting with like the big carriers, and all of a sudden she comes out and she revises 68 from 60. And like, I think if things are sensible, and I kind of understand my audience and my industry, I think you can say that, but like, I'm not going to go like FJB and all that kind, and like all these like sort of outside cursory things. If you stick to the issue, what it is, I think people like respect that. And if you give your side, I think that people understand you're not trying to like intentionally be inflammatory. Yeah. Like, you're intentionally trying to like own the libs or trying to own like the Republicans. But like, the hard part, I think, these days is just the sort of like, the ideals are so different, like on both sides. And there's like this very sort of progressive side that it moves the line. Like, it's moved the line it's pushed some people who used to be more in the middle further to the right, or I don't even know if they've moved, just like the shifting of the ideologies moved so much.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
have to be very sensitive to that sometimes, but like, not super, like, there's still some things like I'll still say, like, I don't care. It's how I think. It's how I think about this world. But like, my goal at the same time is I realize it's a large audience, and like, I don't want to sit here and like offend someone. Like, I'm cool with talking to almost anybody. Like, I don't care what your religious beliefs or political beliefs are, as long as like you're fair and open to conversation. I respect you. Like, and I don't want to say it just to sound like, oh, like neutral or this guy has no opinion. It's more like, I've talked to so many people. I've learned that it's valuable to listen to people.
Yeah. Amen, man. I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. So let's, again, beautiful timing on this. And as we're kicking off 24, and again, because you talk to so many people, you have so much, you're like a blender, like a smoothie of information that's like kind of coming at you from all these different areas. Like, what is 24? What's the, and maybe I want to go beyond, like, what's the sentiment? You can go and like read shit on that. Like, what are you feeling? So let's do this. Let's like your opinion, your feelings from what you're taking in all this information. What do you feel like is coming for 24 for the opinion of one, Timothy Dooner?
There's so much talk about recession, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's especially magnified in our field because we are facing an actual recession with the freight recession, which has a lot to do with overcapacity. But like, the consumers are beat down. The economists, like, they drive me nuts because they'll be like, I don't understand the vibe session. And it's not that hard to understand. For your average like American, they go to Publix, they go to the grocery store, things cost more money. Their bills cost more money. They have less money in their bank account, and there's wars going on, and like, things just don't feel great. But we're also like we have the reflex muscle. We have to buy. Like, this is the way this country works. You're constantly having to buy things. And you're kind of like, why are people still buying stuff? Because like, you can't not keep buying stuff in the US. That's how the damn country works. That's how our economy works. But a lot of people are going buy now, pay later. I do see some of the recovery. There's some recovery in Dow and stuff like that. And, you know, these inventory have to run out. In our situation, it's still a capacity thing. And unfortunately, what that means is a lot more people need to lose jobs in this space, which is awful to see. Like we have a bankruptcy tab on FreightWaves now because there's been so many this year. There's been so many stories. Like there's just Matheson, like 3,500 people for this postal contractor, and we're in peak season. Like you wouldn't think a postal contractor would go out, but like they got their card pulled by USPS and now they're gone. I think it's tough, man. I think the venture-backed companies like Craig always sees and what we're seeing, I think that a lot of them could be in trouble. Fork Heights just cut 15% of their staff, but you know, I think their problems run even deeper than that. And I think that's sort of like the tip of the iceberg that you're seeing. And last month they had a big leadership shakeup. I know they're losing ground overseas where they're trying to position themselves as a global company. And a lot of these companies though, and I don't mean to like, you know, browbeat them or something. A lot of companies are dealing with this where they were valued at $3 billion in fake money 2 years ago for a fake market that doesn't exist. And now they have to reconcile that with what are we really? Are we really just a North American brokerage? Are we really just, you know, we hire these brokers? And if so, realize that quick and restructure quick. Your investors may not like love it or anything, but I think those places are hard. There's also stories. I mean, there's success stories out there too. There's companies that have sort of figured it out. They've gotten right size. They stopped the burn early. They listened in early 2022 about what was happening and they didn't overextend themselves. The problem was by the time 2022 happened, a lot of these companies had gone on like huge hiring sprees. Remember 2020? Like LinkedIn was insane in 2021. Like the amount of people I know who like switched jobs were with some new company was like every single day, multiple notifications. It was crazy. Now, unfortunately, you mostly see like looking for work. And I think that weighs on people though.
100% it does. And I think that's, you know, so being in the sort of the bullseye of kind of what we talk about, these, you know, venture companies, and, you know, that's what we are. And I think, you know, we say it, this is somebody else's line, but I think it rings true. It's like, if you raised money in 21, you're basically unfundable at this point because your valuation was so disproportionate to reality, as you said, that it's just going to be impossible to ever meet that. You're never going to grow into that size. Not never, but largely you won't. Generally speaking, you're not going to. And so I think that does put a lot of those companies in trouble. But I think when we look at, you know, so our company as a software company that services the greater sort of logistics industry, what we're trying to understand and look at is, you know, what is happening. Like we're just as curious about the freight recession, if you will, as a trucking company is, because look, if they're not moving freight, they're not buying software. And if they're not feeling bullish, they're not buying software. You know, if they're not, trucking companies are barely buying software as it is. So things got to be kind of working perfectly there. And so I guess the question is still like, from what you're like, how, if you were to look into a crystal ball and make a prediction, and I know this is hard to do, and I won't quote you on it, but we are recording the show and people are going to listen. I mean, what do you think 24 is going to look like?
Well, before I get there, you made an interesting point. And like, this is very connected, not just the VC companies, even in media. Like when everyone's getting beaten down, they don't have money. You know what also goes down? The value of sponsorships on shows like What the Truck. Like we've all suffered through this. And it drives me insane when people go, oh, Craig Fuller or FreightWaves manipulates the market. If we did that, we would always make it look glowing because we benefit when it looks glowing. We sell more sonar, we sell more advertising, and we get higher valuations on advertising. But that's not what we do. We're telling you about the market. Everything that everyone tells me that I've talked to, and I ask this question a lot, how do you see 2024 going? And I ask it so much I kind of get sick of it because I keep hearing the same response. And it's like, well, we don't see a huge recovery in Q1. In fact, we think January may be really bad because, you know, a lot of freight got moved between November and December that would need to be moved. Then people can be more judicious about how they're moving stuff in January. But I mean, that's true kind of in any market usually, unless you're in like some insane COVID environment. So I think we're prepared for that. I think people have priced that in. And I think like really the telltale and what we're going to see is like March, April. Like if those tender rejects are still like 3.5%, if that spot rate is still like under $2 without fuel, that could be problematic. I mean, we're so tethered. It's almost like that's almost like our stock market. When you look at how this industry behaves, is is what's happening right there. And that's just data. I mean, that's the data. And what some people confuse too is they think the data is the market. No, the data is a reflection of the market.
That's right.
The market has to move before the data can say anything. Like the data doesn't come before.
It's a trailing indicator in many ways, right? I mean, it's kind of telling you the story of what's already happened.
But just quicker. And like what FreightWaves has done is accelerated that. Like it used to be, you get like the CAS report and like, but what good is it? You'd read and you go, okay, this is what happened a month ago.
Right.
Okay, but like what's forward looking about this? Like things can change rapidly in this industry. And I think that they will when we go on the upturn. As you've seen many times, like when the Rose rocket just starts going up, that line just starts going up and capacity gets tougher and it hits the psychology of the whole business. And then shippers realize, oh, things are tighter, and brokers realize they can get more money, and truckers realize they can fight more for what they need. And people realize, oh, okay, I'm moving much more often. And then the industry builds back up. I think 2024 is the year we do it. The only thing that scares me is it's an election year, So who knows what kind of like what's going to be going on, because there's so many like high level things at play. You're talking about what's going on in Israel and Gaza, and you still have, Ukraine. Zelensky was just over here trying to get more money for that. And then we're all just like, well, okay, we need the border funded too, which actually I don't think is a terrible play. I don't think that's like necessarily an off last. Maybe you should listen to them. And maybe you get both done and then everyone's happy. I don't know. Maybe we work together. That would be nice instead of everything being for political points, but I don't really hold out hope for that.
No.
And that's like the one thing that worries me about 2024 is just the parties not doing anything, the gaslighting coming out of on any economic issue, the gaslighting coming out of the White House. Like I feel like that could be a headwind next year. But consumers are resilient. And like when we all start getting our reviews next year, and if people see their salaries move up, because I don't know what these economists are talking about. They're like, oh, salaries keep growing and everything. It's like not really to anyone who stays in a job. Like once a year, you might get like a bump. And in bad times, it might be a very small percentage bump. And when that happens and you look at inflation, you go, I am literally making less money than I did last year. That's what messes with consumers. So I think you also need that psychology of just like, your average middle-class worker going into work and seeing like those raises, those promotions, getting into jobs that pay more money and people feeling good about it and hearing their friends say they feel good about it. I think that by summer, I think things could turn around. I mean, even Craig said so. Like, I think he's kind of holding optimism. If it doesn't, like, what would that be? Over 2.5 years of this thing?
It does feel like it does feel like 2 years coming. Like this next year feels like two sort of stories, doesn't it? I think that's kind of how I feel the same. And it's interesting too, the comment on the vibe session, which is a term I've been hearing lately and I'd never heard before. And it's this thing I've been, asking folks in the know like yourself for the last year and, my own self. It's like, it almost feels like we just need like a good, enema of the economy. Like, we just need something to happen, like an event to occur. Like you need the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac quote unquote event just to kind of like flush it out and like, okay, cool. Like we're at the bottom, things are tough. It's a recession, but we know it. We could we can name it. And I feel like we're in this place where it's like, some think we are, some think we aren't. Like we're like technically not, because you need to show, regression over 2 quarters, but they put houses into that, which then skews the numbers. Like it's so impossible to even really know like where we are. And this whole kind of concept of like, are we in a recession or not, just feels in of itself really bizarre. And almost, and so it just, I guess it's almost like, I feel like the market is just looking for clarity, and we'll take bad news, but we just want some clarity. And I feel like that has been the thing that's been almost unique about this, and that's been absent over the last, we'll call it 12 months.
2021, it set the bar so high. It was such an easy year. Like even look like retail traders, like every guy I know who had like a Robinhood account or any type of trading account, like they all thought they were geniuses. I thought I was a genius. So you could buy any freaking stock and you could take profits. And although when I had to pay my tax at the end of the year, that sucked. But like you could make a ton of money in like Dogecoin. You could do any stupid EV SPAC that came out and you could make some money. You could do anything that came out and you would make cash. And like that you can't go to that like free ATM of the stock market right now. But like, that's not just the consumer level. That's like the free ATM of the VC market too, because everybody's investments go down with it. I don't know if we're going to see that again. And I think that we have like, people kind of have to repair the psychology, like the 100%, damage 100%. that did, where we just got used to never striking out. Like that is a very bad thing for Americans. I think we're finding out. Like, if Americans don't feel like they can strike out, they will immediately overextend themselves. They will immediately buy the craziest things they can think of, and they're going to go out and they're going to have a great time. And the problem is, like, again, with capacity, like in our industry, and this isn't just trucks, like all the steamship lines, they screw themselves too. Those guys had like 1 year of being like, when I sold boxes, they were like $1,200, right? Sold you a box, it was $1,200 China to New York, or $800 China to the West Coast. This 2021 happens, is $22,000. Never been there. It was like such an amazing just jump, and they immediately, without fail, fell right back to $1,200.
Yeah. And built the entire business around the 22,000 one-off like model, in terms of like, next year we'll do it again. And it's like, it is, to your point, I think it is such a 21, we'll call it, is such a point in time that we just may never see it again. And I think you make an excellent point there, that it is one thing to kind of go through it in the economic data, but it's the psychological repair, as you said, and I think that's a great way to put it, that needs to happen. And I feel like that's going to take a long time, because it is, it's, you can still remember it. There's still kernels of that. It's still kind of in your blood, in your brain, about those times. And I think we still are behaving in some ways, not fully and completely, but there's still a sense of, when it's almost like when the economy comes back, we're going to be in 21 again. And I think that's the expectation, that there might be a little bit of shock in the system when things are good again. And people are like, well, this is what good looks like. It's not, but that's what good is, not 21. Right. So we're going to, there could be this bit of a head fake, I think, in terms of expectation management. So anyway, that's a really interesting point. And I like that a lot. This was an amazing interview. I'm super happy that you took the time for us and kicked off our 2024 show. And man, is there anything you want to say, or any place people can find you, and sort of as a closing promo plug?
Yeah, I mean, hey, thank you all for listening to me. Thank you for listening to this episode of Freight Famous, a great show with a wonderful, accommodating host here who's not afraid to touch on the challenging topics, which was a good time. If you want to talk to me online, offline, you think you'd make a great guest on the show, I'm easy to find on Twitter all the time at Timothy Dooner, that's Dooner, or on LinkedIn. Those are my two like main platforms if you want to communicate with me. Even better than email, if you've ever seen like my inbox. Actually, I post your inbox on LinkedIn recently, and it was like 140,000 emails. Like, it's just like a joke. Don't email me. I probably won't see it. Just don't do it. But the show, What the Truck, you can find it anywhere. It's on audio podcast players, any audio podcast player you have. It's on FreightWaves YouTube channel. There's an entire playlist with all 660 some odd episodes on there. Or you can catch us live. We live stream on LinkedIn. We live stream on FreightWaves Twitter. We live stream on YouTube. We even live stream on What the Truck's TikTok, which also does pretty well. So go check us out at any one of those places.
Dooner, you're such a pro. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. You're an inspiration, and I learned just listening to you how to be better at my job too. So thanks, man. Enjoy the year, and I'll see you around.
Yeah, let's go 24.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
Thanks.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to Freight Famous. Let's get 24 off to a rolling start. Happy New Year, everybody.